Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. Tonight, we have with us a pretty normal, standard cast and or crew. So directly over this way, Mala. How you doing, Mala?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. And over that away, we've got Mike. How's it going?
Good evening. Doing very well, thanks. Excited to see you all.
So because Mike is excited to see all of you, we expect all of you to be present and accounted for.
My SQL agent woke me up and told me to come out and be nice.
That's right. So otherwise, you will disappoint Mike. Let's not disappoint Mike. Anders is very excited. So good, because we have some fairly exciting topics to talk about tonight. Look at how I did that move. So I think the one that we're going to probably spend a fair amount of time on is fun story for some definition of fun. You know, security stories usually are that way. This is from the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, talking about the Lapsus group, which this broke in the news pretty heavy about a week ago. And Microsoft's put together their threat intelligence assessment of this organization. The really high-level version of it is that this was a very interesting organization in a couple of ways. One is that a lot of organizations tend to try to hide in the shadows. They try to not be exposed. And Lapsus, meanwhile, is like, hey, go join our Facebook page where we're going to tell you about all the organizations we're going to hack. Not literally, but pretty close, actually. They were very public about the organizations they were actively infiltrating. They would have job descriptions, whereas basically, do you work for a major telecommunications company or a game publisher or a major software company or one of these large firms? If so, we will pay you money to switch out a SIM card. It's just that easy. We don't want data. We just want you to take your phone and swap out a SIM card. What they were doing was getting the ability to do multi-factor authentication because it was tied to SMS and would have the swapped SIM cards so that they were able to make these requests and log into VPNs. Also of interest is the way that they would use different tools to perform threat escalation. So it sounds like one of the operations they were looking at was looking for Jira, GitLab, Confluence, and trying to exploit bugs that were in the software. So if you didn't have the latest version of Jira or of GitLab, then they might have an exploit which would allow them to gain access to sensitive information in your Jira or in Confluence or whatever. They would look through source control, looking for configuration files, looking for credentials, anything that they could use to move laterally within the organization. They would contact the help desk and would try to get the passwords of sensitive accounts reset. And they would, go so far as hiring people whose native language is English and would get photos that look kind of similar to the people and would attempt to exploit organizations, exploit companies that would outsource their help desk operations, where if you don't have any idea who this person is on the other side who's requesting a reset, well, you know what? They sound American or they sound Canadian or English or whatever. It seems reasonable. They're answering questions. So, all right, let's reset. And then they would get those passwords reset. So they would have a variety of different methods of gaining access within organizations. One of the really interesting things was that they would sometimes destroy data on premises. They would sometimes destroy data in the cloud and would then jump onto incident response calls So they may jump onto a bridge call, and part of being on there was to understand who was part of this incident response team, who on the incident response team would do different actions, try to understand the policies, and be able to subsequently mitigate the incident response team's capability to solve the next issue, which was the thing that they were really interested in. So they would do something minor, observe the results, sit in on these briefings, basically, and then use what they've learned from that and use what they learned from policies and other things that they were able to gain access to in order to do what they really wanted to do, which, depending on the organization, could have been things like, initially, I guess it was using a lot of stealing cryptocurrency wallets, trying to exfiltrate data for extortion, trying to steal data for just dumping it into the public. So Andrew says, this is why I've been arguing it's dumb to have company-wide swap calls. So one of the things that came out of Microsoft's recommendations was that you have, they don't actually use the term zero trust, but essentially this is from a zero trust perspective. Assume that somebody is on your incident response call. Assume that they understand your framework. Now the question is, what do you do about that? And that's where you can have a sub-selection of people, known trusted people, which I know zero trust, but like this person I know is, I know this person. I know these people on the security team, these people on administration. And that subset of people would have a side channel where they could communicate separately from the official incident response process. And when you're on the incident response process, you're also looking out all of the different telephone numbers that show up on that bridge line. You're making sure that every single one of those is a valid person who should be in that call. When you get to a large company, that can be difficult. There may be 100 people on that call, and you'll spend the entire time. Okay, number 5678, who are you? Oh, I'm Jim. You know Jim, that guy, Jim. Andrew says, I only trust one person in my company. That's right. That's right. You got to look out for number one.
Jim probably puts commas at the end of a line. Ugh.
I mean, so do I, but... So we usually have the tech people on a side call from the official SWAT call, which that can be useful. I mean, that could be useful just in general, but where they were going was having processes in place so that you have sort of the ability to build some level of trust outside of an incident process where a thing gets so big that you can't innately trust everybody.
So, Kevin, how was it legal for them to advertise like they did
So how is it legal? Here's the short version. It's I'm not a lawyer. That's the short version. I don't know what I'm talking about. However, despite not knowing what I'm talking about, we're just going to plow straight ahead because that's what we do on Shop Talk. What I would expect is that arguably putting out a call for something that it might be illegal. That's the thing. I'm not sure if the action itself is illegal. If you're asking somebody to swap a SIM card, because maybe you could hit them for CFAA, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Maybe there's telecommunications fraud that you might be able to get them on. But basically, the job advertisement is something that a reputable board would take down, and probably reputable boards were taking them down. But the question is, how long until somebody alerts that, hey, there's this shady activity going on? You might be able to get that, well, this is conspiracy to commit fraud. And so, that is a crime. But
So
And
anybody who responds to that, because you're using your phone to get into your work network, you are responsible for compromising your work network. If you give your SIM card to somebody, you would lose your job in an absolute heartbeat, right?
Yeah.
probably, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's assuming that the company knows that you have done this. And Andrew says if they sent a check, mail fraud. Yeah, losing job, right. Basically, you get fired is not the same as the police go after you.
No, I understand that. Yeah, it's not illegal,
And
but
and so, yeah, you could make the argument, and it probably is accurate, that the advertising that they're recruiting might have been illegal, conspiracy to commit fraud.
right.
I say might because you're also talking about people who are not necessarily and probably weren't in the United States. A lot of Lapsus's targets were South American to begin with. And I know that some people, I believe that some people have been arrested in response to this, but I haven't paid close enough attention to who was arrested. I would expect that probably a lot of the people were outside the U.S., which means it doesn't matter if mail fraud is a crime in the U.S. unless you are going to look for some type of international policing operation where Interpol, there we go. If you have some sort of international policing operation where they're going to extradite the person to the U.S. to face charges, otherwise, so what? I broke a law in the U.S. Well, I don't live there. Not my problem. And in that case, yeah, you've broken the law. But again, what's the actual consequence of that? Who's going to hunt you down? The answer becomes maybe some other police organization in your country, especially if you get enough people wanting it. And when you're pushing major telephone companies, major telephony companies, major software companies, server hosts in a lot of different countries, now you have a problem where you've got a lot of organizations who are putting pressure on police forces in a bunch of different countries. So yeah, you're not going to get extradited for this, like Anders mentions, but it's probably still a crime where they're at. And if not, then, well...
Well,
trying not to say anything out loud.
Well, my dad has this experience. So he had a very cut and dry fraud where somebody stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company over time, and they had all the evidence. But it becomes the onus on the company. It's time and effort, right? Because there's crimes going on all the time. And so where do the police focus? And then there's multiple different police, and there's, if it's local, it's going to be a sheriff, and then you have to go to court, and then you have to pay a lawyer, and it just becomes a big cost of business to go after people.
I've been at a place that was like that too.
Yep. But then, on the other side, you also have the difficulty in small scale fraud is two things. Number one, it's really difficult to figure out who the person committing the fraud is. And so as a result, police don't necessarily have the best ability to figure out who committed this fraud. The best that they can do is wait until this has been released and then have somebody sift through the evidence and find, oh, well, they committed fraud against all of these people. And now I can go back through those cases and, oh, yeah, here's this person. Let's contact them. Otherwise, they're not going to send out the elite cyber teams to go hunting down these bad actors. However, on the other side, when you're messing in Azure, when you're messing in AWS, when you're messing with organizations that have very large security teams who can hire people whose job is to hunt down these people,
they will find you.
Now they find you. And that's kind of what happened here, where apparently this organization had gotten a person, they'd exposed an account at Microsoft and that account had access to some source control.
Right.
And they were able to pull some of the source code out. While they were exfiltrating source code, Microsoft's security team said, "Hey, this is weird behavior." They started investigating and figured out that this was an attacker, that this was somebody that they wanted to avoid giving access to. So they were able to find them, and then were able to essentially hunt down who are these people, track them back, and cooperate with federal governments in different countries, which Microsoft has done repeatedly. And they have processes, they have the connections to be able to do this kind of stuff. We've seen it before in other cases as well. And so in that case, it's a bit different. It's you messed with the wrong target. So yeah, those people may not be extradited to the US, but still probably gonna have a bad time.
There's other things they can do besides the law. They can put pressure on them in other ways, or just at least stop their behavior, which is the thing they don't want.
Yeah, so within that organization, they're going to find, if these people did commit crimes, they're going to find something.
There might be like independent people, like MacGyver-ish people that find people for companies. I don't know. Maybe that's a TV show. I'm getting a little dramatic.
Yeah, that is a little dramatic. I mean, you will have people who would do independent threat hunting. A lot of times, though, it's in the context of working within an organization for a couple of reasons. One, you're going to get paid for those skills. Two, the legalities of it are interesting. I remember this is a few years back, so maybe laws have changed a bit since then, but there were open questions about whether threat hunting was, if there were any legal questions about it, where threat hunting could mean something like sending them a Word document that had capabilities embedded into it, which would provide geolocation, or providing PDFs that would then give off location. Essentially knowingly sending documents or files or other assets that would call back home. So technically, at the time there was some question about whether that was actually legal or not, and I don't remember what the answers are. I believe my guess is it's probably lots of lawyers talking about lots of things and eventually coming up with, in these conditions, yeah, you can get away with it. In these conditions, maybe you don't want to do that. But I don't know exactly where that line is because I haven't been in the security sphere in a little while. So it is an interesting open question. It makes me wonder if large corporate security groups
what is the information they stole from Okta yet? Because Okta is just, so many other applications are part of it. How deep were they able to get? And
I haven't seen the full details on what actually has happened with Okta. If they were using Okta, I know that this organization had found they were working on mechanisms to simplify the process of multi-factor authentication exploitation. So that would be SIM swapping. That would be trying to tie your multi-factor authentication to relatively simple mechanisms like voice call or SMS, so that they could easily bypass. Okta doesn't know what happened to Okta. I mean, I can believe that. In a lot of cases, companies don't know until months later that they've had a security breach, and it can take months after that to really piece together fully what was that story.
so one article I'm seeing says 366 of the corporate customers were impacted by it. I wonder if those 300 people know who they are.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And there's, there's I know that there's law in the books where if you have been affected by a breach, you're legally required to be notified within a certain amount of time.
Right.
But then there's a lot of fuzziness about that, because the question is, well, is it from the time of breach, from the time of discovery, and or from the time that there's confirmation that you're a part of it? And lawyers can play a little game with that. Perhaps SMS is not the best multi-factor authentication option. It definitely is not. And this goes back to the Microsoft article that I posted in chat a little bit ago.
Right.
If you do want to read the full report, it's a good read. It's probably about a 20-30 minute read, but it includes some good guidance around, for example, don't use SMS or voice for multi-factor. Have a tool like the Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, and specifically use the numeric code. So that 6-digit code that pops up instead of a simple accept or reject.
That sounds more secure for sure, yeah.
Yes. Also, they recommend, well, instead of passwords, you could use something like FIDO. So you could use something like a YubiKey, where you have a piece of hardware that you control that sends a token instead of having a password, because now you don't reset the YubiKey. And if somebody tries to call help desk, well, no, we don't have a password. You don't reset a password because you have your hardware device. And
what if somebody steals the device?
What's that?
Somebody steals your device or it's lost somewhere.
If somebody steals your device, basically you have sort of the combination of your phone and the device. And if you lose the device, somebody steals it, then the token can be canceled and you get sent a new device.
Okay.
It's not an ideal situation. It's kind of a don't do that. It'd be like losing your driver's license.
Right.
I think Duo did that as well. Yeah, Okta is simple accept or reject, at least that's how I've experienced it. And Duo, I believe, is pretty close to that. But there are authenticators that will give you a number code, and you type in the number code, and it refreshes every 30 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that combined with something like a FIDO solution does get around the specific social engineering attacks that this organization was doing. They were doing SIM swapping, because if you have your two-factor authentication be through SMS, swap out that SIM. And so if they have your SIM, which is tied to the auth app. So that's the thing. If you don't have the auth application on your SIM card, then life is a little better. And that way a SIM swap attack won't be effective. So that's some of the advice that they recommend. That way they're not able to, or even if they have access to your phone number, the solution, the program is installed on your phone and is still local to your phone, versus SIM swap, where they can basically take over your telephone number and receive calls, send calls, and receive and send text messages as you, which is what they were doing.
Interesting.
So as far as recommendations go, if you're an organization who's looking at this and you said, holy moly, what do we got to do about this? The biggest recommendation, do require multi-factor authentication, and make sure that it's pretty good multi-factor authentication. So Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, something that uses number matching. versus the accept or reject. Avoid telephony, so avoid phone calls that read out a number, or SMSs that you say yes to, because those can be fairly easily bypassed with SIM swapping or SIM jacking.
So I
they
think
also.
Anders,
Oh,
the
go ahead.
hardware you described is different, Kevin.
Yeah, so you can use a passwordless authentication method, so something that has a piece of hardware that will allow you to log in. I would not personally recommend something like biometrics for authentication. There's a fairly high, you'll either have a lot of false positives or a lot of false negatives with biometric authentication. So things like fingerprint readers, retina scanners, those types of things. I don't know, they're better than they were a few years ago, but if you're relying on that for corporate authentication, I'm personally not a big fan of it. I would definitely prefer device that you control over thing that you are, because fingerprints can change a little bit over time. And also, if we're in a case where, I'm thinking about mobsters take you, I would much rather they take my USB stick than my thumb or my eyeball. So, I will give over my USB stick.
That's well said. Absolutely agree.
So we should all use Pixel phones that have soft SIMs. Anders, why you got to do this to me? One of the other things that they mentioned was break glass accounts. So every service has that break glass account, that this is your overall administrator, the account you can't get rid of, the special account that is, owner of all. Don't store those credentials in a password manager. Even in your corporate password manager, store them written down in a secure vault someplace. Lock them up in a safe, put them in a deposit box somewhere, and in the event that you need that account, then use those credentials. But otherwise, that account should be completely out of any type of password manager. So they had a lot. And actually, one of the other interesting things was that apparently the organization would use NordVPN so that they could get access to IP addresses that were pretty close to where the actual person was. So if the person lives in, for example, South Carolina, you find a VPN outlet that is close to there, maybe in Charlotte, maybe Charleston, somewhere, and would connect from there. That way, a lot of organizations have location-based impossibility checks, where if somebody is logged in already from Charleston and then someone attempts to log in from Romania, they'll say, oh, well, this is obviously fraudulent because there's no way a person could be in both places at once. Whereas if they're in Charleston and also in Charleston, that happens. They're close enough locationally that this probably is the same person, or at least could be the same person, and so we'll let it through. And these attackers knew how to exploit that by using publicly available VPN service that has a whole lot of endpoints around the world. Evil Anders, if the person sold access, why not just use TeamViewer into that person's PC? That's actually one of the things they did, Anders. So Evil Anders is on point. They would, in addition to things like SIM swapping, they would also pay employees at companies to install something like TeamViewer, install or have some executable that they could use to control the laptop, and basically say, you should go for a walk for an hour or two and just ignore the laptop. We're not going to do anything too bad. And they would use those capabilities to try to move laterally within the organization. So not just connecting through that person's machine on the VPN, but then use that to create accounts that could access other parts of the network, that could exfiltrate data more efficiently without being caught, because that person's desktop or laptop, that may be caught, but now let me pivot over to a server that's used to handling a lot of data moving in and out, and see if I can get access and direct connection to that server. What I did with SA when I had to run mixed mode, 2 pieces of paper in envelopes with no indication of what they were for. Yeah, that's sort of the equivalent of 2 people with keys have to put them and turn them in a lock that is too far away for one person to reach, and they have to be turned concurrently. That is a physical mechanism which we have seen before, and what you've got is essentially the equivalent of that. Yeah, and you put them in safe deposit boxes. You might even put them in 2 separate safe deposit boxes, or you have one in a safe in somebody's office, one in a safe somewhere else. So, if you do think about those scenarios and what is the worst that could happen, that's not a bad solution. Turn your key, sir. Exactly. That was the movie I was thinking of as I was talking about that. But I mean, those also exist. That solution also exists in real life. One was at the people that stored our tapes. That works. I mean, their entire method of operation is we store things for lots of companies, like a bank, a safe deposit box. We store things for a lot of people and a lot of companies that we are going to make sure it doesn't burn down, it doesn't get stolen, it doesn't get destroyed. It's a pretty good place to store a secret, especially if it's only part of a secret. I also had backup laptops in 7 different locations.
Oh my.
That's just paranoia.
Quite investment and 7 different laptops.
He had just read Harry Potter.
Or Jason Bourne.
The Horcrux.
Yeah, 7.
It's Evil Anders, I mean,
that's fair. That's fair. 7's a lot, but that, in fairness, if you have 1 laptop at each major corporate location and 1 laptop that's in safe deposit box someplace, that's not insane. If you're a big enough company where, if a catastrophic event could be millions or billions of dollars, what's $10,000 in laptops?
peace of mind.
We could run 7,000 radio stations off what we had stored off site. That's a lot of radio stations. That's a lot of pirate radio you had going on, Anders.
Right.
Only some of the 7 laptops contain pieces of soul. That's a fair point. You also want to have decoy laptops that have explosives in them.
Oh, jeez.
Just remember which ones are which. Technically, they're Samsung batteries, not explosives. Practically, they work the same. That joke, in fairness, is what, 7 years old. The Note 4 and its battery would kind of, sort of disintegrate itself every once in a while.
Yeah, my buddy has a Chevy Bolt, and he can't park it in his garage anymore because of insurance, because they spontaneously catch on fire, and they haven't fixed it yet.
That will happen from time to time. So that was Lapsus. I think there's a lot of interesting information that came out of this attack. I think we're going to continue seeing more interesting information for the next few months. So we may cover it again, but definitely check out that article, that threat assessment. It was pretty well done, and it also contains a lot of different queries that they used to track down what this operator was doing, and kind of track down some of the people in that organization. So these are queries that if you're in Azure, you could run against your Azure Monitor solution. You could run it against the logging details that you have currently available and be able to see similar activities if somebody was doing it. My CISO team won't be happy until we're back to chiseling data into stone tablets. Stone tablets are really insecure. Do you realize how easy it is to read off of them? You just look over someone's shoulder. We can't have that.
You just take a piece of paper and a crayon and you can copy it.
Yeah, exactly. That's totally unsafe, Anders. We need to work on that. All right, so next, let's have a conversation about something that I'm pretty sure Mike brought it up last episode. Yes, but it would be easy to know what was stolen. Well, also you have the History of the World Part 1 bit where I bring these 15 commandments, these 10 commandments.
That was awesome. Oops.
So yeah, disaster recovery becomes more important when you're putting everything on stone tablets. But let's talk about how to talk when talking gets tough. Kind of like SSDs. Yeah, pretty much. Something that I'm pretty sure Mike brought up in the last episode of Shop Talk is how do you communicate when things go sideways? So you had an issue at your organization not too long ago, Mike. And go as unspecific or as specific as you'd like to go there.
So, yeah, I mean, I won't say any details of it. I mean, obviously, most people, quite a few people know I work at Duke, but it's kind of, we get probed all the time. I mean, hospitals get probed all the time. My wife was actually doing some consulting at a hospital out in Eastern North Carolina, and while she was there, they had gotten their data locked and ransomed. So we had an issue with this was just more of a growth issue. I think what's going on with Durham is like every other road is dug up. And so we lost connectivity for a long time, prolonged period of time. And, it became abundantly clear that just communicating the response, how do you communicate in a world where you don't have the internet, you don't have the phones, maybe you have a personal cell phone, but you don't have everybody's number, or you don't have all the right people's number. And then if there's a natural, because Duke is I think it's called a tier 3. It's like it's a legal thing, like where if there's like a natural disaster or an earthquake, like we're one of the disaster centers, like designated. So I think they're called tier 3 hospitals or something like that. So there's just a few of them, and we're one of them. And so there's all these protocols. So anyway, I think in the end, one of the things that they were considering and partially executed was like Encrypted Cb Radio or something like that. Does that sound right? There's some sort of encrypted.
Yeah, you can do
ham radio signals.
So it's not ham.
Like that.
Yeah, it's not ham. It's there are specific bands. Technically, it's not CB either, but there are specific bands that are encrypted. Ham and CB have to be unencrypted legally, from my recollection. But you can use certain radio bands to send encrypted data.
Yeah,
and that kind of shortwave solution. Yeah, that's an interesting approach, but yeah.
So very few people, but it's like key people. It's like the people who have the key. Like there is a way that they can communicate now that in case that type of thing happens again.
Yes, and even if you're not a tier 3 disaster center organization, this kind of thing does come up every once in a while. So one example is a prior user group meeting. I remember it was Thomas Grosser who was speaking for us, and my internet was dead. My phone was dead. I could not receive phone calls or send phone calls. I could not get on the internet. Power was out. Everything was just crazy. If I remember right, it was heavy rains. It was just kind of a nasty weather. And I wanted to get message out to Thomas that, honest, I'm not ghosting you. I just can't get online. I ended up, the only thing that I could do was I think I could send SMS, but that was about it. It was either send SMS or some other very low bit rate mechanism. And I ended up having to contact a friend of mine to reach out to TG in order to let him know that power was dead and we'd have to reschedule. I couldn't even get out to reach out to Tracy. So that's kind of how bad that was, that I couldn't get on Twitter. I couldn't, access any kind of internet from anything. And it gets you thinking about, well, what do you do in that scenario where your normal means of communication are gone? So company I talked to before, Anders says, we had a call tree from an external company for mass messages. And for key personnel sat phones, satellite phones are an option. They work pretty much everywhere in the world. As long as the satellites are accessible, they're going to allow you to communicate. Very expensive. But again, if you're in a situation where this needs to be going, where you need that communication mechanism, it's an option. A group I was part of on September 11th, the only way we were able to get a hold of people in New York City was IRC. And this is something that Mala was talking about before the stream. Sats are dead. It doesn't matter anymore. Oh no. Don't hurt me like that, Anders. I still thought that satellite phone was a thing.
So we had where the company I worked during 9/11, or pre 9/11 rather, in New York City. I worked just right opposite the Twin Towers for quite some time, and everybody had a printed list of contact information for those critical to in your department around you, that was refreshed every month, and you were supposed to carry it. Like something happens, then how do you reach this person personally? It was a paper printout that everyone carried. That's what helped them during that time.
Right. And so if you have telephony capabilities, that helps a lot. Okay, so I missed the if satellites are dead, it doesn't matter anymore. I get you. I'm following you now. I feed data from the company directory to the call tree company every week. Yeah. And so if telephones are up, then at least you can have that mass dial that, hey, this event happened. One of the things that Mala had mentioned was setting up, I'll call them wildcat messaging systems. So set up a Slack channel. Okay, well, your normal means of communication has gone down. Internal corporate communications has gone down. Set up a Slack channel, which can work if you have, but you kind of need a way of letting people know either beforehand that this is our emergency Slack, or you have some contact mechanism during the event itself. Being radio, we were part of the National Response System. And these are the types of organizations that have planned this out a lot better and know a whole lot more about it than I do. That's kind of interesting. It is interesting learning about what are the types of things that people will set up. And you have secondary, you have tertiary communications mechanisms. So you may have cellular phones, you may have, say, cellular hotspots, you could have multiple internet connections, multiple lines. You try to find other mechanisms for getting messaging. I would say landline telephone, except pretty much all of that goes through cable anymore. So it's all fiber optic, which means if your fiber optics are out, telephone might be out. It may still be up even if your cable's out or your internet's out, but there's a higher risk. This isn't the old days of coax and cable lines being separate. Our DR system costs 1.5, maybe a million, 1.5 units a month to maintain. Two different companies, lines that never cross, between two DR sites 750 plus miles apart. Which now when you're talking, this is $1.5 million a year, or excuse me, $1.5 million a month. That you're getting a lot for that. And again, you have to think about what is the potential downside risk if you lose this capability. This was in 2002. Okay. So in 2020 dollars, that's what, $8 billion a month? I kid mostly. But yeah, when you think about what is the risk, what is the likelihood of that risk occurring, and how much of that downside am I willing to absorb? Essentially, disaster recovery is insurance. And the same capability today would be about $200,000 a month. So you think it would be a lot cheaper. Is that because of cloud services? Is that because bandwidth has become that much cheaper? Or is it that we've found ways to standardize things, cloud and more players? Okay. I can see that. I mean, I could also see, bandwidth is cheaper. And at the other side, I could see there's also a whole lot more data to push through. There's a whole lot more of processing that needs to be done, and that can push the price back up a bit. Where if you needed one database with 100 gigabytes of data versus pushing hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of data, the costs start coming back up again. So I guess if you're smart about what data is relevant to criticality of the organization, what data is not as relevant, we could lose this and not freak out. Replicated 300 servers, 100% of the data center. Which, yeah, that's a lot of data. But it is also an interesting thought experiment where, okay, suppose you don't have internet, you don't have phone.
Excuse me.
How do you, what are those alternatives? And I mean, at this point, especially on the consumer side, if you're talking on the business side, you can have multiple data centers, you can have different lines coming through, say, one cable provider, one phone provider, and have two internet pipelines. You have different phone options. There's more, I think, that's available at the company level. And playbooks. Yeah, you definitely want to have, in the event of this type of an outage, here is the action to take. So if you know that internet has gone out at the company, let's start dialing people up, or have a system that starts and begins calling people. If the phones are out, then do this. If there's a hurricane in your city, here is the action to take. And when you are talking about a large enough organization, you will have that. You will have practice with it as well. And from the consumer side, we could probably take some of those tips. But, I would say if I had today an outage that was as bad as the one that I talked about when TG was speaking, I still probably would have at least as much difficulty getting that information out. That I don't have backup internet, that I don't have satellite phones or other mechanisms, because, well, the money is just not worth it. Like the amount of money that I would pay for that disaster recovery plan, just in case anybody wanted to know, the amount of money that we make from TriPass is zero. So, I mean, except for SQL Saturdays, that's where I make all my money.
Wait, we've been doing this for free?
You didn't realize all the checks that I sent you have been bouncing?
I thought you were just accruing it somewhere in like a ledger.
Yes, a ledger in the Cayman Islands. No, so basically, all right, this is a user group. We're not going to have a fancy budget for pretty much anything, and as a result, saying, oh well, an extra $150 a month for this sat phone. I mean, I love tax write-offs as much as the next person, but you know, there's a limit even for me. Bring back SQL Saturdays. That is maybe, probably not for 2022. It's getting to be a little bit late in the year for us, because I like to have one in the spring versus the fall, because the weather is typically a little nicer, and we would probably need about 4 to 6 months of planning to really pull it off. More importantly, we would need a building that would be willing to let us host a SQL Saturday without being exorbitantly expensive. So we are starting to see a few SQL Saturdays come back. Orlando had one last year. Jacksonville's having one in May. I'll be down in Jacksonville for that. We're beginning to see Oslo's actually got a data Saturdays in September that will be in person. So a few places are going to have in-person events. We're in Raleigh-Durham, probably not 2022 for a SQL Saturday. We may have user group meetings back in person at some point. I say may. I haven't actually really discussed it with the board, much less with different hosts. And I kind of like not having to go anywhere. I've gotten pretty lazy in sitting around at home for 2 years. I'm like, yeah, I could get used to this. So despite that, we will at some point look at hybrid, continuing what we were doing in 2019, which was have the event in person, but then also bring the equipment to stream it simultaneously. And that would be my return to in person. I wouldn't say it's a compromise because, you know, we were doing it in 2019, but that return to in-person plan should apply for Oslo. I was thinking about it. I don't know. I don't know if I would. I don't know. I'd have to see what things look like in September, and that's the problem. Where even assuming I got selected, it'd be, well, do I want to travel to Europe? Air travel now is even worse than it was a few years ago. Please keep streaming. Oh, we will definitely keep streaming. Even when eventually we do go back to in person, we'll still be streaming just like we were before. And the audio quality will probably go down a bit because, well, you know, but we would do what we can to make sure it's still pretty good.
I was thinking about doing some streaming for, you know, just doing SQL stuff, and the recommended times were 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. I was like, ooh, I don't know about that.
Who recommends that?
It was in the context of less competition and more international audience availability, which made sense to me. But you know, 4 or 5 people viewing is plenty, so I'm good with that.
All right. So I think we're getting close enough to the top of the hour that I'm not sure I want to hit any of these other options. So, you know what? Let's talk about one thing real quick, since I've had it on my list for a few weeks, and it's from friend of the channel, friend of the user group, Mark Gordon, who had a question about replication models and was asking, is it preferable to use push replication or pull replication in SQL Server? And so my thought on this, pretty briefly, and I want to open it up. I know Anders has spent a lot of time. I just called you out. That's right. I know you do replication, Anders. Pretty sure some of the other folks here in chat have replication experience, but my thought on this, push replication is a good default. So the difference between push replication and pull replication, the terminology I'm going to use here. Push replication, you have a publisher, you have subscribers. We're going to ignore the whole distributor thing for the moment. But push, the publisher has a change, sends it to the subscriber. As long as it's not merge replication. Let's pretend that neither of us knows about that. So push replication, publisher sends data to subscriber on a schedule through a SQL agent job generally, and it's sending those changes over. Pull replication, the subscriber says, hey, give me the latest changes. And it's pulling on a schedule, sometimes through a SQL agent job. So my recommendation, default to push. That's a pretty good default because what it does is it can centralize your jobs and your processes. If you are pushing out to an enormous number of servers, you may have to have a job server to handle all the agent jobs, or you have some other mechanism to schedule. But yeah, like Anders says, push is conceptually a whole lot easier. It also works best when you're on the same domain and when the same people own and operate all of those servers. So pull can become necessary when those conditions aren't met. So for example, your machines are on different domains and the machines are locked down so that the publisher is not allowed to access the subscribers. So this is especially common if your machines are in different networks, they're on different domains. Your publisher may be in an area that's accessible, but the subscribers may have rules that block everything. And so they'll block every incoming connection that is not originated by an outbound connection. And therefore, pull replication becomes your choice, because now I don't have to worry about how do I get data pushed in, because the firewall prevents it. So today I would just put it all in Azure and not worry about it if possible. Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. If you're able to get away with that, that is one of the benefits to cloud providers. Even so, you may still have zealous network administrators, especially again if the subscribers and the publishers are owned by different organizations or they're owned by different administrative teams. And that's where you can run into a problem. If your server operators are not the same people on both sides, then you may have to open up pull replication. But I would probably default to push. We did it to push inventory down to stores, and stores push sales back up to us. Yeah, it is so much easier to do it that way. And so I would only go with the pull option if you needed to, but sometimes you need to. So that's pull versus push replication in just a few minutes. And with that, we're nearing the top of the hour. So everybody, quick reminder that we will have 3 more user group meetings in a couple of weeks. So this Tuesday, tomorrow, we got nothing. It's a bonus day. That is one of those rare 5th Tuesdays of the month. And therefore, no meeting. Next week, we got nothing, because I'll actually be in Las Vegas for dev intersections. So also because we normally have nothing scheduled first Tuesday of the month, but 2nd, 3rd, 4th Tuesdays of April, we do have a great cast of speakers who are coming at us. Check those out, meetup.com/trypass. And with that, Anders will be back in a month or so after moving. We will miss you until then, but don't worry, our aim is getting better. With that, we're going to call it a night, and everybody, till we see each other again, take care.